We started growing food up there about 8 seasons ago. I was working as the produce manager, actually the fresh department manager for the Great Basin Food Co-op, which also helped develop the food system and organize the supply and demand chain for distribution for all the local producers. And I spent 4 years there before we started the farm, and it gave us tremendous insight into what was working, what wasn't working, and where the gaps were and opportunities were for growers. We had lots of conversations with the small, medium-sized growers about changing up some of their crop plans and their timing to help fit a lot of what the demand was, not only for the food co-op, but also for all the restaurants that we were seeking out local organic produce. And it left there's just such a huge gap in the Great Basin for food, and there's so many things that these farmers just were too mechanized to touch, and also didn't see as an opportunity.
Welcome to the Real Organic Podcast. I'm Linley, Dixon, co-director of the Real Organic Project. We're a grassroots, farmer-led movement with an add-on organic food label to distinguish organic crops grown in healthy soils and organic livestock raised on well-managed pasture. You just heard from Cannady of Prema Farm, just outside of Reno. Dave interviewed Zach at the EcoFarm conference to learn more about his unique story of transitioning from a food system worker to a first-time farmer because he saw gaps in production that he thought he could fill.
Welcome to the Real Organic Podcast, and I'm pleased today to be talking with Zach Cannady from Prema Farm up in the Sierra Nevadas.
That's
Did I
correct.
Get that right?
Yeah, Eastern Sierras.
Yeah, Eastern Sierras of California. Hi, Zach.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's so great to have you here. So I've been impressed by you ever since I met you, and I thought, here we are at EcoFarm, let's take this opportunity to share some of the interesting thoughts you have in your head. Tell me a little bit about yourself, your farm, the scale.
Oh, yeah, we grow at a unique elevation at about 5,260 feet in a really volatile climate, and we were challenged with the fact that nobody else had kind of done what we're doing, at least in the Great Basin of where we're at. And we accepted the challenge. We started growing food up there about 8 seasons ago. I was working as the produce manager, actually the fresh department manager for the Great Basin Food Co-op, which also helped develop the food system and organize the supply and demand chain for distribution for all the local producers. And I spent 4 years there before we started the farm, and it gave us tremendous insight into what was working, what wasn't working, and where the gaps were and opportunities were for growers. We had lots of conversations with the small, medium-sized growers about changing up some of their crop plans and their timing to help fit a lot of what the demand was, not only for the food co-op, but also for all the restaurants that we were seeking out local organic produce. And it left there's just such a huge gap in the Great Basin for food, and there's so many things that these farmers just were too mechanized to touch, and also didn't see as an opportunity.
Is that gap because there's not a lot of local food production?
Yeah, and most of the producers there are timing out, and they don't really see it as such an opportunity. They were considering and felt like our conversations were actually more of an obstacle as opposed to an opportunity. And I think that that's maybe something that happens over time. People find things that work well for them. They develop a market around that specific crop, and then they just stick to that specific crop. And that's what we realized when we were working with a lot of the growers, which aren't many, but that nobody was really willing or wanting to grow bunch carrots or baby cut greens and some of the more laborious crops. They were specifically stuck on single crops, a season, and just doing what worked for them and has worked previously.
Growing a bunch, and they put it in the wholesale market, and it goes away.
Yeah.
So you you were less of a what might be called a truck farm and a little more of a market garden.
Yeah. Highly diversified. We've grown as many as 50 varieties of fruits and vegetables on a little bit less than 2 acres.
All right.
Yeah, and so we run as many as 120 person CSA in the COVID years when some of our direct-to-consumer outlets like the farmers markets around us closed and the wholesale stuff subsided a little bit. We channeled the rest of the produce directly into the CSA program that we've run since we started. But for the most part, we do 80 to 100 CSA boxes a year, generate 6 figures an acre since the second year. And yeah,
I always have to count 6 figures.
Yeah. And not 7 for sure.
Yeah. So that's like, you know, the model that like J.M. Fortier made famous of 100,000 an acre, and
that was it.
Yeah.
We met him at a Nevada City Small Farm Conference, and he came over for dinner afterward. And such a wonderful, humble man, and I really enjoyed his time. And I left the conversation with him, and we were already into year 1 at Prema, and decided that if he could do it, we could do it. And he really boosted our confidence just to get out there and get things going. So
yeah, he's kind of an extraordinary guy, actually. He has the whole farm program, and where people come and apprentice for a year or 2 years, and when they leave, they go start their own farm. Yeah. And I asked him once, I said, so, Jam, how many of the people that come through your program actually go off and start farms? And he said, 100%. I said, 100%? That is amazing. He said, well, it's not because we're such amazing teachers. It's that we're really amazing at picking people. And the people we pick were already going to start their own farm and probably make it work, but now they're going to make it work a lot better. Yeah. So I thought, interesting comment about there's certain people who are just going to do it. Yeah. But certainly he has a deep skill set to share with them to help them to succeed.
Yeah, agreed. I think he made it very accessible, and that actually translated a lot over into our hope that we could help inspire more farmers and then use maybe some of the excess on the bottom line of our farm, even in its early days, to get more local farmers kind of up and operating to develop a food system. And
okay, now wait a minute. Some of the excess, like what do you mean by that?
Profit.
The profit.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So we've taken about $40,000 a season for 3 years, and put that into education in the form of an intern program where we'll take on excess labor, and we would never have hired 4 people. And run it in a really slow fashion so that we could transition or transfer over as much information as we possibly can to the folks that are working on the farm. So it's not an ordinary environment by any means. It's actually, we take the time to work a person through every single portion and part of our process. But a lot of it was largely inspired by Jean-Martin Fortier and that Market Gardener book, because the way that he refined out a lot of that information, I feel like it makes it accessible for a lot of people to tap into and to build farms from there.
Wow.
Yeah,
that's really neat. So JM did this amazing thing. He learned a lot of that from Elliot Coleman, but he certainly put it together and presented it in a way that was very interesting and engaging for people. And now you're learning some of that, and it's passing it on again.
Yeah. I find that intern programs can be abused, right? If you bring people on too early and you're not in a place to education or to offer education, and there's not a real transfer there. Like people will bring people on in the form of education and then just abuse that and use it for labor. Yeah. And it's hard. It's hard when you're in a really fast-paced environment and you're working with all this diversity of crops and you're trying to manage the whole farm at the same time, manage an education program. But we felt like it was the best thing that we could do for the world. Like it's bigger than us, right?
Right.
Yeah, and so we just felt like, what other option we have? We can continue to carry the weight, and we have no interest in getting any bigger or any busier. Like I think we probably operate at 60 to 70% efficiency. I think that if we had closer gaps on our transitions in the field and better fertilization and just seeing crops all the way through, we could be more productive than we are now. And I'd prefer to focus my attention and energy on that as opposed to expanding. But before we even did that, I felt like we kind of reached a pinnacle where we had a ton of demand coming to us and we couldn't even achieve close to what was being asked of us. So the best thing that we could do was start to help build the food shed.
Yeah, that's great. You were there yesterday when Phil Foster was talking, and I was really struck by, he said, well, we mostly don't take more than one crop a year off. We could, but we choose, because we're growing our fertility a lot, they choose to give that land more time to recover. So it's less intensive than what you're doing, less intensive than what I'm doing.
Yeah.
So in a really intensive thing, and I want to come back to the education, but in a really intensive market garden where you are taking 2, 3, 4 crops off in a year.
Yeah.
I mean, I take one crop off, but I take it off all year.
Yeah.
Then your inputs have to be a bit more intensive too.
Yeah.
For us, it's compost. We make our compost. What is it for you?
We've gone back and forth on this, and we kind of went with the Lane Ingham soil food web inspiration when we started, and worked with, stacking just a lot of compost in the first season, increasing microbial activity, and we found some really bad compost, and I was completely unaware of it. And we ended up putting a lot of it onto the field, like almost 240 yards of compost in 2 seasons. And so every turnover, we were doing this, and we invited in a plethora of problems that we were not prepared to handle at all. And it was really outside of my reach and understanding. And so year 3, we transitioned a lot of that over to the Albrecht method as I started to study up and started working with Kinsey Ag. And the irony with them, like in the hands-on agronomy book that Dr. Albrecht wrote, he talks a lot about, or not a lot about, but there's brief hints that you could apply too much compost and bring things out of balance. And so we pulled back a bit. Our organic matter increased from about 1.5% to 6% in about 3 seasons. And because of that, we knocked a lot of the calcium, iron, and trace minerals off, which increased a lot of the disease and brought in powder molds and downy mildews and things that we hadn't seen in the first 3 years. And so I guess like a lot of my education has come by trial by fire. And it's fun to hear at conferences like this that the sentiment is actually really the same for a lot of other people too, that people like, you just try it, and then you introduce fertility systems, and you educate yourself to the extent that you can while you're in the mix of growing the food, with the hope that there is this like holy grail, right? That you're going to get exactly what the crop needs and wants at that time, and the fertility is going to fix all of the issues for aphids, and base saturation is going to be achieved, and the soil is going to be so microbially active that it's going to be able to resolve most of those issues internally before they express themselves in the plant.
Yeah.
And so, I'd say the last 4 years for us have been that. It's been a reset. So we went back, we've worked with Kinsey Ag, we follow a lot of their recommendations, and we had to bring in some outside fertility to do that. And now we've gone back into lighter doses of higher quality compost. And I'm excited, by your process of achieving the crop's needs and, just putting on small applications at a time. And it reminds me a lot of what Singing Frog kind of presents. And I think that them and Richard Perkins' kind of design are really inspirational in that at the beginning, they went for 4-6 inches of compost and really set the ground for a lot of microbes and microbial activity and biological activity in their soil. And so now that our base saturation is dialed in, our pH is kind of scaled back down, because from the compost that we brought in that was really poor, the pH was about 7.9, and historically our pH sits at about 6.7. And so it really stretched our pH towards alkalinity. And so, now our fertility program is, I just have a lot more insight, from all these mistakes that we've made. And so we look at the compost before we apply it. We understand, what it has. We even vet it through the agronomist at Kinsey Agriculture to find out application rates. And we don't follow his recommendations 100%, because they tend to wean back and do lighter applications than I think that we want to get that microbial activity up and really flourishing on the farm, so that there's so many earthworms that you could, put your hand in and pull a handful out. But I think to get there, you really need to get that and keep that organic matter high to do so, and the biological activity high. Yeah,
you told me that Singing Frog has cut way back from the earlier thing, which I knew about, that they're using mega compost.
Yeah.
5-6 inches a year.
Yeah.
That's a lot of compost. And now they're just using 1/4 inch a year, did you say?
Yeah. Yeah. We went and sat with them at the Nevada City Farm Conference a couple of years ago, and it's about 1/4 inch of compost per application. And so they could do 3/4 of an inch to a full inch in a year, depending on how many terms.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it's a lighter application.
Yeah. That's great. It seemed extreme to me.
Yeah.
I mean, everyone's got their own farming system. And,
yeah. Yeah. I think the introduction to cover cropping in these small scale regen kind of farms is also, it has a lot of promise. In my altitude, it's really difficult to get cover crops in because we have a 90-day window. It's usually June 15th to September 15th of frost-free days. And we're liable on either end of that to catch a 20-degree night, and kill frost most of the crops in the field. And so, yeah, to get a cover crop in that can sustain that, or that can come up in the spring and will kill before late spring planting, or that won't winter kill but that could endure, has been an adventure for us to try and achieve, and then to work that in to crop rotations on the farm. And I talked to Ray Archuleta this last year, and he's like, just stick with the compost. I was like, on your scale, that's the way to go. He's like, you're imitating essentially what the cover cropping would do anyways. And we are currently we're planting, but we have a space in our crop rotation that works really well for transplanting these transplanting these crops like brassicas that come off in these 50 count seed trays into a terminated cover crop. And there's nothing better than having the soil covered, and especially with those cover crops and fixing all of the micronutrient, macronutrient needs through cover cropping. And I think that is something that is going to be the next stage for us and what we're working on. We currently cover crop about 30% of our fields, with the hopes that we can plant directly through the terminated cover crop.
You cover crop it for a year or sometime during the year?
So right now we came up with so after potatoes are terminated, they'll come out in late August for us, early September. We found a cover crop mix that'll germinate at 40 degrees, and it's a cereal rye with some daikon and some cold hardy stuff in there. The daikon will overwinter, but the cereal rye, vetch, hairy vetch, and an Austrian winter pea will in our climate. And so as long as we can get them up, 3 or 4 inches before it gets too cold, they'll overwinter, they'll mature out into the spring. We could terminate that, and we terminate with a 8-foot T-post just tied with ropes on the end, and we walk and crimp it and then cover it with the silage tarp for a week and make sure everything is dead under there, and then pull the silage tarp and plant.
Okay, that's beautiful. Let's slow that down. So you put down, like, you say T-post. I don't know that. Is that like planks or something?
No, like a T-post that you'd pound into the ground for a fence, And so we'd use an 8-foot T-post, which covers 2 beds because our beds are 4 foot on center. And then 2 people walk in tandem with the T-post under their boots. And they walk every 12 inches and they crimp the edge of the T-post right into the bottom of the cover crop. And when they do that, it snaps the bottom of the cover crop.
And then you move the T-post up another 8 inches or 12 inches.
That's it. And just walk up and down and up and down.
So you're rolling crimping the crop without any equipment to do it except a steel rod.
On a hand scale, that's correct.
Yeah, no, that's great. I'd heard somebody else doing that.
Daniel Mays from Frith Farm.
Okay.
Yeah, he was the inspiration for that one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so you do that and then you tarp it?
Yeah, just for a week.
Just for a week?
Yeah.
Black tarp, not
That's
clear.
right, a black silage tarp.
Yeah.
Yeah, over the whole field.
Yeah.
And then peel it back. And yeah, we experimented in planting a terminated garlic this year through a terminated cover crop because that works really well in our cropping system. And it's a little bit cooler, but where we're at, that sun meet, you could have a full sun crop, but nothing wants Nevada full sun.
Uh-huh.
It's brutal. And so, yeah, the soil temps, if you leave bare exposed soil, they can get up to 150, 160 degrees on a barren soil. And those cover crop beds will rest at 80, 85 degrees in the canopy of that shade, and the garlic will do just fine there.
Yeah, beautiful. Okay. We got to hear Helen Keller yesterday.
Yeah.
Were you inspired by that?
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah.
I thought she was just doing some interesting stuff.
I think people's reflection, I think like when somebody is filled with vitality and then they're like a wonderful reflection of their, because farming becomes that. Farming becomes, it's not just a livelihood, but it's a lifestyle. And it's something that's like, at least for most of us, it's so interwoven into our being that it expresses itself in pretty much everything that we do. And so I think when people have completely digested that, and then as it expresses itself as vitality into the world, and they found a way to manage that, I think that it's one of the most beautiful things. It really does. It looks like somebody is living their purpose and they've fulfilled exactly what they're meant to be doing in the world, and she's that. Yeah. I mean, I think in every dimension I find her to be really, really inspirational, like from her scientific mind, just to the expression, the physical expression of herself is really enchanting.
So I agree with you. I agree with you. What did you think of what she was saying?
Yeah. So when it comes to flavor, I think that's where we get the biggest return, and we have the biggest conversion ratio. And I think flavor is achieved through biological activity, and it's really hard to find metrics on that, right? It's hard to say like, yeah, this food is, because it's better for the earth, you should eat that. But if somebody puts our cherry tomatoes against Del Cabos or Wholesomes or whomever is, shipping these, green tomatoes up from wherever they come and they're a month old, our conversion ratio on that is extremely high.
Explain conversion ratio.
So we have consumers that are out and they want to be doing the right thing, but they don't know what that is. Like the Real Organic Project is the opportunity that provides a consumer that trust. Like we all shopped at Whole Foods for years because we're like, these guys are doing the right thing. I could let my defenses down. Like I'm at Whole Foods, like let's go. And then but then you ask questions and you look at the labels and you realize the SKUs are all jacked and none of it is really true. And yeah, you have to bring your defenses back up. And I think the consumers are doing that with the organic label. They're questioning again, like, oh, great. Like I had all my defenses down. I gave my trust over to this and now I have to relinquish my trust and start over. And so people are looking for an opportunity in the market to deposit that trust in. And those are the people that we want to convert. We want to convert them to local food. We want to convert them to food that's sustainably grown and regeneratively grown and grown in soil. We want to bring those people back into insulating our local food sheds and making decisions that allow other local, organic, small farms to prosper. And I think that's vital to regenerative agriculture in the future of humanity.
Yeah.
So we convert them.
So that's the conversion you're talking about.
Yeah.
People getting it.
And
they go, oh my God, I get it. This is actually what I want to eat. And it turns out that they're right, that the story behind that, the real story behind that is what they'd hoped it would be.
But most of the people have to be converted in their mouth because their minds, right, we've got so much access to information and it's like so wishy-washy and it's, like we may think about one thing 1 second, but then the next second our mind is somewhere else and it's really hard to convert people there where we are at now. And even in words, they could find somebody to be inspirational and they can connect to you in words, but it's just not enough. If you get somebody in the mouth, like in the flavor and the olfactory senses, just right there and it's so blatant that you cannot refute it. You know that that's how the carrot and the spinach and the tomato is supposed to taste or the garlic. And you know it. And in that moment, you're like, I've been doing something wrong for a really long time, but I didn't know that it was wrong until now. And now, I guess, yeah, it's like the definition of sin, right? Like it's not really a sin if you don't know, like if you're ignorant to the fact and you're just completely veiled. But then the moment, the more people we can unveil, then the more people can make better decisions because they have access to that information and they have the contrast in their experience that will allow them to do so. And so, yeah, more food and more local food and the more eaters, I think the conversion ratio is extremely high for folks that are going to make that crossover and then seek that out and make the time to go to the farmers markets and stop putting their dollars back into Whole Foods and major conglomerates and rather into local small farms.
Okay, I'm inspired. So you think that, do you think that we're going to need to develop different ways of distributing that food, and ultimately the point of contact with the eater is probably not going to be a supermarket chain, it's going to be something else? Is that what you're thinking? Or do you think that, I mean, you could take your tomatoes that bring about a conversion experience, and same with Hughes blueberries. People eat them and they go, oh my God, I didn't know that they could taste like this.
Yeah.
And they might need to pay attention. It's interesting. There was it was when we had a book club with Dan Barber, and Mark Schatzker was in the audience, and he asked Dan, because Dan says something very similar to what you say, and he asked Dan, well, but people's senses are so dulled by the industrial food and the Doritos and the fake food that is engineered to create craving, and it does, it's good. So he said, what's the gateway drug to get back to real food? He asked Dan, what do you think is the food that might create that conversion and wake them up? And Dan said without pause, bread. He said, real bread from real grain that was recently milled and baked well is, jaw-droppingly good.
Yeah.
And people will go, oh my God, this is the bread I want to be eating.
Totally.
So but if you took Dan's bread or your tomatoes and you put them on the shelf in Whole Foods, do you think that works? Or do you think that there's something already broken there? I'm just curious.
Yeah.
And I'm not trying to pick on Whole Foods. They're probably the best of all the chains, right?
Totally. Yeah,
right?
yeah. And I'm sorry for bringing that up even an
No,
example, 'cause I agree with you.
but here we are, and it's like, well, do we need to find a different way of distributing food?
Yeah. I've been a part of a couple of organizations that have really put the cart before the horse. And what I mean by that is that I see all this federal funding and state funding, county funding that's being directed into that's being deposited into our food system. And it's probably millions of dollars by now. And it's all ineffective. And it's all targeting distribution and farmers markets, and none of it which really addresses a lot of the core issues. And so it's a really hard question to answer. We've worked on building food systems where I'm at, and we've worked on distribution, we've worked on building a food hub and all of this stuff to make food readily accessible. And the hardest part has been what we're now tackling is getting more farmers into the market, diversify the market so there's enough bounty of food. And so it's hard for me to address it from an angle perhaps like that would be in Vermont, where there'd be an excess of food production or a lot of food production and opportunities to distribute, and where accessibility is less of an issue. But from where we sit and what I've seen, it's kind of, and I don't want to if you build it, they will come Kevin Costner this out, but there is, the more people that are involved in the food system, I have all these philosophic comments rattling their way through my mind.
Let them come.
Yeah, but if you let the folks come, the more people that are intrinsically involved in the food system, the more people are going to be connected to their food, and that there needs to be a means to do so. If somebody's not, you can't, and you can't, if I give you a sheet of paper, you could say thanks to the tree, but you're never going to remember the tree, right? You need to have a way of connecting the action all the way back to its source so that you could, there's actually a confirmation of that gratitude. And I think neurologically, the state of wow or awe in our mind is superior to almost anything. And so, we've diverted a lot of our attention into farmers markets and working with people so that they could have beautiful experiences of tomatoes in the farmer's market, and they could have that wow experience while they eat it, or the carrot, or whatever that is. And the reason why we do this direct-to-consumer kind of relationship is so that they can tie that relationship back to its source, maybe. And I think that the grocery market extension, while it offers convenience to the culture, and that's the reason why we shop there and we depend on that so heavily, I do think that you can't technologically bridge that gap to bring somebody back to truly acknowledging the source of its food. So scale is a huge issue. I lived in India for a long time, and you know, there's 3 billion people that live in that small country, and all of which are fed by 90+% of which are fed by farms that are less than 5 acres. And you're so intrinsically interwoven into the food system that you have this relationship with all of these growers, and there's no refrigeration in a lot of these places, and so you're shopping daily and communicating with them daily, and they know exactly what you want. And I don't know if we have to go back to that to revitalize what I would see as being intrinsically healthy for each one of us, so that we could sit at the dining room table every moment and have a food conversion experience of gratitude that would bring us back closer and tie that all back into nature, which would then allow us to make more responsible decisions as consumers and so on. But I see food as being a vehicle for that. I see it as being an opportunity. How we deliver that to people, and as us, like, can we afford to go to the farmer's market and sit there for 8 hours? And does that make sense for all of these farms to do so? It doesn't. But how we convert that story, and we get that story, maybe that's through more delivery systems, and maybe it's more direct-to-consumer, pre-sell. I mean, just meeting the market where it's at right now, all these online shoppers and pre-selling huge baskets of vegetables, leaving your customers 1 hour to come and pick this up. And you get out in a day and you do 500 drops, 500 boxes, and you're meeting all of the consumers in 2 hours, and it's a really efficient system. Maybe that's the solution for where the market is at now. In the future, I think, in such a roundabout way, is bringing people back into the food system so that they're ecologically tied to their food, and they have something to do with the way that the food's being produced, and the way that, feeling like their life is purposeful and full, and making a contribution to the local ecosystem in some way. And whether that's a compost program that goes directly to your local farm, and then they get to work through that compost, and you feel like you're responsible for a portion of your farm's fertility program or something like that. But having connections and networks interwoven into these communities where people feel like they're attached to the source of their food, again, I feel like is intrinsic to our health and the health of the planet. And I don't think that until we get to that point, I don't know if we're going to get where we want to with the consumer-grower kind of relationship that we really want to have.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's interesting you bring up, I mean, there's health, physical health, but there's mental health too. And it seems to me that the system you're describing would offer a lot of benefit in both physical health, mental health, and of course, health of the community, and of course, health of the environment, health of the climate. So it's actually a revolution that you're proposing, a shift. But let's do it differently. One thing that's interesting, so you actually make a living farming, right? And I think that's something to acknowledge, that you're pulling this off, and apparently pulling it off at a level where you're still able to take some of that income, and you're choosing to pay it forward, but there's enough there that you can pay it forward and not starve to death. So even in the current system, it can be done, is being done.
Yeah. Ethic, it's, you gotta want to work.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you want to, it has to be a whole systems approach. You have to run it like a business. It's like we were talking about yesterday, there's no margin, there's no mission, like we have to understand that, but it also has to give over passion, right? People have to be excited to be working there, and they have to feel like they're doing their life's work while they're there. They have to feel like they're making an impact on the world, and it's fulfilling to be part of something that is working to be an advocate for change for everything.
I thought Scott Park's comments were very interesting yesterday, because Scott is sort of a hard-driving, this is the real world, I'm missing a couple fingers because of the farm equipment I work with kind of guy.
Yeah.
And he said, without any shilly-shallying around, this has got to be profitable.
No margin, no mission.
No margin, no mission. And he's also, I know him well enough to know he's an intensely idealistic person. And even just in the low-till experiments, he ultimately sacrificed about $500,000 pursuing that vision.
There's no economy on a dead planet either.
Yeah.
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 How do we weigh that?
So tell me about a little bit more about the educational stuff that you're doing. You and your partner Kristen,
Kasey.
right?
Kasey.
Kasey,
Yeah.
Kasey Crispin.
Yeah, Kasey Crispin.
Crispin.
That's it.
Excuse me.
No problem.
Kasey. I met her only once, and she's wonderful, and actually, obviously, has a lot of vitality and very smart. I was very impressed. So, you're choosing to do things that normally people wait to do until they're my age. They're old,
Yeah.
and they go, "Oh, I want to give back. I want to, I've done well or whatever." But you got 2 little kids.
I do. Yeah, 4
Yeah.
and 7.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
right. So you got your hands full, and you're still doing stuff. So tell me what you're doing. What
in the form
are
of
some of the
education.
things that you've thought about, you and Kasey, and you've gone, this would be the way to have the best leverage in our world for the things that we want to see happen.
In the form of just education, or I think working hard is a given. I think that when it comes to action, there's a saying that's a really popular, not a really popular, but it's one of the Yoga Sutras that's always stuck with me anyways. And they say, Abhyasa Vairagya Byam Tanirodha, and it means like give everything, every moment of every day of your life, and ask nothing in return, and you'll find eternal peace. And I feel like I have no choice in that. I feel like I am responsible, and we're responsible as a family to show up in a really good way. So we model for our children, I feel intrinsically tied to giving everything, every moment of every day that I can, and not taking one moment for granted. And I feel like you end up just being an advocate for change when you see something that's not working, because there's such a strong desire there to help make it work. And that is what fuels the fire for us to become such, because it's so easy to acknowledge all the things that are failing, but then to do nothing about it. And so we have to be solution oriented, and at least make the most amount of contribution that we can in our lives to being advocates of change. And I have no choice. And so I look at it and I say, well, what is the most effective way for me to be an advocate of change? And so I went for like social justice and working through the food co-op and building the food system and contacting all the current growers to try and rebuild the whole thing to match all of the local growers or local buyers and eaters' needs. And it couldn't be done. And so the next solution was, okay, well then let's start a farm and let's grow the food that the public is demanding, to see if this is viable where we are, so we can meet the buyers where their demands are. And let's see if we could build a viable thing from doing this. And so we did. And then we met the market where they're at, and where more people are like, we need more access to local food. We have 18 weeks of farmers markets, but that's it. So can you guys continue to make us a more multi-seasonal offering, that maybe expands, through the duration of not the uncommon growing season in the grounds of winter. And so we started to grow fall, winter, and spring to meet the customers again where they're at, just to see if it was possible. And in doing that, there was no outlet. So we developed a farmer's market, and then gave an outlet originally to 3, a meat producer, a hydroponics tomato grower, and then ourselves. And then now the market is a house to 40 bakers, craftspeople, local up-and-coming small, medium-sized farms. And they now have this sales outlet that generates the equivalent to what the big farmers markets do in the peak season. And so I think that like for us, not that it's like a written strategy, but I think that we are good listeners. And we were meeting the customers exactly where they're at, and we're fairly methodical about how we're going and how we're trying to build something that is resilient enough to withstand the world as it changes so quickly. And so a resilient system in farming, and, a local food shed that can help buffer, losses and catastrophic losses and floods in California as heat waves and floods infiltrate the lands and make the land infertile, and big monocrop farms get invaded with thrips and make romaine growing impossible. And small, diverse little farms and small, diverse little food sheds provide a ton of resilience. And so that's a solution that we can effectively apply and make a huge change and touch thousands and tens of thousands of eaters to then have more conversions back to home. And so, yeah, then the education is a reflection of that, right? It's a reflection of, why does this mean so much to us? Like, how can I educate you on that? How can I hand this over to somebody that's coming in as an intern to understand our program and our philosophy and our life work? And why does this mean everything to us? And let me tell you about that, let me give you that first, and let's set the ground for that. And then all of this stuff out here, we have absolutely no idea what we're doing and how we're doing it and why it works and why it doesn't work sometimes. And all we can do is encourage you to continue to try and use, biological metrics as a means for knowing if it's working or not working for your farm and in your situation. But hopefully instilling people what we can convert in PDFs and information and all of that, we can give it all over, and taking the time to do that. And so, yeah, we essentially wrote a book because of that, which got everything out of my head and then onto paper, and then we hand that over and allow people to learn all the lessons that we've learned in 10 years of mistakes, so that they don't have to do what we've done and fail how we failed, and they could save tens of thousands or $100,000 in mistakes, and maybe they'll make it.
Yeah, that was really sobering when Javier talked about that. I think he's the only person
from Alba
who's made it more than 5 years. And Alba seems like a great program. So I was like, wow, that's such a serious problem.
Yeah.
So much. We have a lot to do. So maybe winding up a little bit, Zach, you're part of the Real Organic Project. Why? Why are you part of the Real Organic Project?
Yeah. Well, at face value, because it tells a story that we may be unable to communicate to everybody that's going to purchase from us. The label will confirm to an educated buyer that the soil or that the food is grown in a good way, and that they could trust that, like we talked about, that they could put the defense system down, and it'll allow them to come on board with us. And so the work that you're doing on your behalf. And then on our side, we've considered dropping organic label for some time. We sell 100% of our produce within 30 miles of our farm. There's no real disconnect from any of our customers. And we felt like we were really let down consistently by that label, because we don't feel like it translates what it should and what it originally was intended to. I think soil health intrinsically is a solution that could mitigate a lot of the issues that we're dealing with in climate. And it could mitigate a lot of the health issues that we express as humans, physically, mentally, emotionally. I've had personal revelations on long extended fasts and food things that I've done that told me that food has an unbelievable impact onto almost every aspect of my being, spiritual, physical, emotional, every bit of it. And so I feel like being a real organic producer allows people that opportunity to let down their guard and eat our food and know that it gives the world a chance. Yeah, it's like, what else can you do? You know, it's if I wasn't to do it, I feel like I'd be falling short. I feel like I wouldn't be taking all of the opportunity that's presented in front of me and living it up to its utmost. I feel like I would be, I don't know if I'm expressing that properly, but I feel like if a new opportunity like this presents itself and I was to hear about it, or you all were to approach me and I wasn't to do anything or act onto it, I feel like I wouldn't be for the betterment of the food system and all the things that I philosophically believe in soil health and all of that. And so I feel like for me to engage with it, to celebrate it, to wear the hat around, to talk to all the folks that I know about it, to invite it into our community, to help people realize what that means, is going to do something that's much greater than I could do, and much greater than I could do by myself individually. It allows me to join a large network of folks that are really interested in doing the same work that I'm doing in the world.
Good. Okay. Thank you. Zach, is there anything last thing you want to say before we call it a day?
I don't know if there's anything we didn't touch on that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Good. Thank you very much, Zach. I'm glad we did this.
Me too. I really appreciate
it. You're one of the inspiring younger farmers that I've met, and it's wonderful to see next generations coming and carrying on.
Yeah, we're going to do the work. I promise you that.
Thank you for listening to the Real Organic Podcast. We hope that you'll subscribe and share the link with your friends. Please take the time today to leave us a rating and a review on whatever platform you're listening to so that others can find us. A video version of this interview is found at realorganicproject.org and by following our YouTube channel. Please join us next time when our guest will be Peter Donovan of the Soil Carbon Coalition.